Welcome back to another episode of the Field of 68's off-season grades. My name is Rob Dauster, and today I'm joined by our noted Big Ten expert, Mike LaTulip, and we are going to be breaking down the Big Ten powerhouse, Rutgers Scarlet Knights, New Jersey's favorite college basketball program. Interesting roster build here, Mike, and I'm curious your take on this because Steve Pikiell is kind of going all in on the one and done movement about 6 years after everybody kind of stopped going all in on the one and done movement. He brought in Dylan Harper, he brought in Ace Bailey, who would probably be the two best freshmen in college basketball if Cooper Flagg had decided to stay in the class of 2025. I love both of them as players. I don't know if I necessarily love both of them as the focal points of a college basketball team in 2024, but we'll talk about that. He's added some transfers around them in Tyson Acuff, a scoring point guard from Eastern Michigan, Jordan Durkak from Merrimack, PJ Hayes and Zach Martini, a couple of shooters from mid-major programs, as well as a couple of other freshmen. They got Jeremiah Williams back, they got Jamichael Davis back, and they got Emmanuel Agbole. I hope I pronounced your name right, Emmanuel. Got him back as well. So interesting lineup build here. Interesting roster construction. Before we get into all of that kind of stuff, though, what do you make of what Pikes is building? What do you make of his team? And what do you make of the one and done movement happening in Piscataway, New Jersey?
Yeah, I'll start with the one and done movement because it's interesting to see the trend over the last few years. You look at, I think I've done some research on this around the NCAA tournament because you look at like the Sweet 16 teams and right there's 16 teams, which would be 80 starters. Four of them are true freshmen.
Mhm.
And if you look back at like 2015, the year that Duke won, Tyus Jones, those guys, there was 21 in the Sweet 16. So there's been a massive shift. Part of that, I think, is due to COVID. You got older guys that have been playing college basketball. I think teams have prioritized that. I think this year you're going to see more of a shift back to not only teams prioritizing. I think having younger players that you can build with, these two would not be the case there because they will be gone after this year. But I just think freshmen are going to have a little bit more value than they've had in previous years. So that's the first thing, and we'll dive into that. But I thought Pikiell did a couple things this offseason. The first one is I think he remembered one of the cornerstones of some of the more successful Rutgers teams that he's had, and those teams have had positional size. Um, and there's really three areas that can help you in, right? If you're a pick and roll offense, which I expect them to be if you have Dylan Harper, now you got a 6'6" guy that can get you on your hip, can put you in jail, and can create easier advantages for an Ace Bailey, for a Zach Martini, for a Hayes, these guys that can shoot it. And then at the top of that token 2-2-1 press that they have, you got more length. You got Jordan Derkak. You got guys that can be disruptive and create easier opportunities off of turnovers. And then the last part is defensive rebounding on the aggregate. When you have more positional size, you just have more advantages on that side. So that positional size, getting back to the Ron Harper, Paul Mulcahy, Cam Spencer, I'll throw in his positional
Mhm.
size, Geo Baker, Caleb McConnell, like those have been the successful Rutgers teams. Now you have a little bit more skill and you have a little bit more overall, I think, offensive skill and they're a little bit more dynamic when you factor in Bailey. But the last thing that I'll mention with what Pikiell did this offseason, he's had two teams in the last three seasons that have been top six nationally defensively and defensive efficiency per Ken Palm. And I think if you're Pikiell, you're like, well, the hell has that done for us? Right? I mean, but now you go out there and you bolster your offensive profile. You get Harper and Bailey, obviously, but sticking with just this offseason, everywhere else in the portal, it's guys that I think fit around those two. It's Martini catch and shoot, Hayes catch and shoot. If you need a guy who can change things up in Acuff who can come off the bench, prolific scorer at Eastern Michigan, and come in and go get you a bucket, that him and Jordan Derkak, who had the ball in their hands a lot at their respective schools previously. How they make that mesh, we'll see. But I think Pikiell's done some really nice things to put himself in a position certainly win more games than he did last year in the previous couple years.
It's kind of a tough needle to thread, right? Like the backbone of what Rutgers has been under Pikes while they've kind of had this resurgence has been like this defensive juggernaut, right? You know, you go into the rack on a cold, snowy Wednesday night in February, and you know that the first thing you're going to have to do is deal with the fans. The second thing you're going to have to do is deal with the fist fight that's coming for you on the floor, and the third thing you're going to have to do is try to find a way to get to 60 points. Because if you get to 60 points, you're probably going to end up beating Rutgers, right? But it's not going to be easy to get to 60 points. So that's kind of what they've been, but it hasn't worked at the level that you need it to work to be able to get past, a win in the tournament here, a 500 record there, right? Just uh, being relevant enough to be in the mix for an NCAA tournament bid at some points towards the end of the season, right? So it's kind of like, do you want to just keep that defensive mentality? Do you want to find a way to get better offensively? Can you get better offensively while maintaining some of those core principles? And what I keep coming back to, and I mentioned this to you before we started recording, is that I I have a tough time seeing with how this roster is built, how they're going to be able to be defensively at that level while also being able to provide enough spacing for a guy like Dylan Harper to be able to operate, if that makes sense. So I think that there's a tough needle for Pikes to be able to thread in that sense.
And I think that's fair. I think, but the good coaches and the good programs, especially with Pikiell, right? Like you should be able to come in to Rutgers, even if you're an average defender, and leave a better defender, right? If that's truly your identity and that's truly what you do, then it's not just about bringing in, kind of set it and forget it, ready to roll defenders that you can drop in and say, hey, here's our identity. If that's what you're about, then you will instill that in guys that come in.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm Dylan Harper, if I'm Ace Bailey, some of these other guys, A Cup, Durkak was depoy for Merrimack in that league. Like they should be able to learn, right? Like, hey, if we're playing for Steve Pikiell, yes, we have the offensive ability, but we have to bring it defensively. And you touched on it, right? Like if you get to 60, you beat Rutgers. 2 years ago with the Cam Spencer team that probably should have gone to the tournament. They were like, I think 33 in the net or whatever they were, and really high to get left out of the tournament. 11 of their 15 games that they lost, they didn't eclipse 70. Like they couldn't get there. And when you look at, we spend so much time, like let's stick on the Big Ten, right? Beating Purdue, beating Illinois, beating Michigan State, beating all these teams. And if Rutgers is going to get into that upper echelon of the conference this year, you think about like, last year's how do we stop Zach Edey? How do we stop Terrence Shannon? How do we stop all these guys? Because you're a defensive minded guy. But for a lot of those teams, you got to score with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like you could sit there all day and say we're going to have perfect defensive principles and be in this spot and rotate. But if you can't keep up offensively, it doesn't matter. So I think I'm willing to give Steve Pikiell some leeway if he's saying, "Hey, we're loosening the reins a little bit defensively," if it means that we are now having a little bit of an uptick offensively. Because I think you're going to have good defensive games where teams are just better offensively, and now I think they're a little bit more dynamic. I think the pieces make more sense offensively. Jeremiah Williams is another guy that I thought came on and was a shot in the arm that they needed last year. So um, yeah, I mean, it's a give and a take, right? I mean, we saw it with a number of teams last year, Alabama being one of them. They're like, cool, you can score however much you want, but if we got Mark Sears and we got
Still
a
got to
potent
stop
enough
us.
offense, we can just go and you got to keep up with that. So we'll see if it works out the way I think he's planning it to. But your defensive principles are your defensive principles, and if you can thread the needle like you're saying of have the offensive players, now can we get them to buy in on that end? That's where I think Rutgers will really be cooking. It's a matter of if.
Yeah, there's so the last couple of years it's been like the defense has kind of been built around having Big Cliff at the 5 spot, right? And being able to funnel things down there. And you got the shot blocking, you're going to force some turnovers. Um, I would love to see this year, and I'm curious what your take is on this. lineups where you're going small, like maybe even playing Ace Bailey kind of in a small ball five role, or Zach Martini in a small ball five role, and you put Dylan Harper out there with Jeremiah Williams and Jordan Durkak and Ace Bailey and one of the shooters. And all of a sudden, then you can still do some of the 2-2-1 press stuff that you want to do. You still have athletes, you still have positional size. Like you're putting out five guys that are going to be between 6'5" and 6'8" with those lineups. You also have a shooter on the floor. You also have floor spacers. You also still have the fact that Dylan Harper is going to be able, like, look, there's not a lot of freshmen that you can run offense through. I think Dylan Harper is one of the few guys he's not, he's a senior in a 19-year-old's body and a senior in a 19-year-old's, a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old's mindset, if that makes sense. Like he's old, he's mature. I think you can probably do some stuff like that with him. And I don't know. I get it. I hope that they go small though. I think that there's a lot of
Yeah.
fun things you can do with small ball lineups with this team.
I think it's baked into my overall grade for them. We'll get to that, but yeah, I mean, he must really like what he has in Ogbole, and
Mm-hmm.
he must see a jump with him, or he's going to do something he hasn't done before, which is have space and play. Maybe it's Zach Martini at the five, where you
Mm-hmm.
say, "Hey, we're going to have a pick and pop five man," which they've never done. And it was Miles Johnson in I think year two when Pikiell was there, had him for a few years, and then when Johnson left, it was Amuri going into his sophomore year, and you had 3 or 4 more years of him. So they've never played that way offensively, and I think that's just going to create more opportunities for Harper to operate. But you talk about Ace Bailey playing at the five. I think if Ace Bailey plays at the five, that's even more reason to lean into that 2-2-1 defensively because
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily want a team to have to walk the ball up, get right into a cross screen in the post, throw it in, and have Ace Bailey guarding down there, potentially getting into foul trouble. Have these guys, Derek Bailey, have these guys roam, play center field like they do, and try to create havoc defensively. I think it's kind of what excites me about Rutgers is there's just like we're 12 minutes into a Rutgers preview, and like there's probably even more possibilities that we can throw out there. And
Mm-hmm.
that we're just not used to that because they've had such a set it and forget it way of playing over the years. And the good teams, the good programs, the ones that have had success in college basketball have adapted. They just have. Like the ones, I mean, you look at Michigan State, Tom Izzo running a lot of the same stuff, doesn't address a lot of things in the portal. Same defense, everything. And you've seen that Michigan State program in a way plateau from what we're used to. So there has changed. And I think Pikiell is kind of just, enough was enough after the last few years. So I think there's a lot of lineup versatility they have, and that's kind of what excites me about them.
All right, let's before we get into X factors and all that, let's just talk a little bit about Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Give me your takes on both of them. Let's start with Harper.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, how rare is it for a program to this type of program to get a guy like this, let alone two, right? We've seen the one off, like, hey, this guy goes here, probably a one and done, but for them to get two of them, but Harper, I think I've just fallen in love watching his game over the years because of the pace that he plays with. I think, the pressure he puts on the rim, the skill level, his size. His game isn't fast, right? You wouldn't really qualify him as being like a guy that plays fast, but you also wouldn't qualify him as a guy that plays slow. So he can do both, which means he has great pace. But the balance, right? The rim pressure, the size with the handle, I think he's got some Shea Gilgeous-Alexander in him.
Mhm.
Just a guy at that size that can really, really dictate the pace of the game. I'm just curious to see how much he uplifts this Rutgers team. You have to run a good deal of pick and roll with him, I think, allow him to read and react. But those pieces around him are crucial too, that we talk about. Like multiple guys, I think, have to prove to be threats in order for Harper to have the type of year that he's capable of having. So he's a first team All Big Ten type of guy. Forget freshman of the year. There's going to be a few guys that are in that conversation, but he's right there to if Rutgers has a solid season, he's going to be a big reason why. And it's crazy to think of Rutgers having these two type of guys. It just is. But they do, and it's certainly going to help him. Harper's going to have a big hand in that.
Yeah, he has what I think is fairly called old man game. And you mentioned Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. I think that's a really good comparison because of his ability to he, he's going to beat you off the dribble, but it's because he understands how to change spots, how to change speeds, how to get you off balance, and kind of how to use his strength to create angles and to take advantage of you leaning the wrong way. If you get, does that make sense? If you're leaning the wrong
Yeah.
way, yeah. He reminds me a little bit of Johnny Davis. I don't know if that's crazy. Where it's like there's some athleticism and some spring there, but what makes him so effective is his ability to kind of play off of what he can make a defense do and make a defender do. Um, I love him, man. I think he's gonna have a really,
Yeah.
really good year, and I think it's gonna be fun
Yeah.
to watch him play. Ace Bailey, crazy athlete. I can't wait for the highlights. There are gonna be some dunks that he has this year that leave you shaking your head.
Freakish. I mean, he's as freaky as it gets. Especially for a freshman, right? I mean, his highs are extremely high. You touched on it, but I think his Ace's biggest challenge is going to be his shot profile. Like it just is. I mean, I think for how much of a physical and athletic advantage he had on lesser high school and AAU circuit opponents, he bailed them out just far too often. With like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 degree difficulty shots. But I think playing alongside Harper, Williams is a secondary ball handler. Acuff can go at times. I think if he simplifies his game, and this is like a really hard concept, I think for guys of that stature to grasp, but if you can simplify your game, like I don't think we're talking about him as like a top 5 pick, top 3 pick. I think we're talking about him as the best player in the draft, not named Cooper Flagg. Because I'm looking at like run the floor, hit heads, become a great cutter, and be relentless on the glass. Those are 3 things that like maybe wouldn't come to mind for Ace Bailey if you're going to name like the first 3 things. But those 3 things alone are 12 points a game for him
Mm-hmm.
alone. And now if you can focus on, hey, where are my high percentage 3-point looks, right? Where are my straight line drives in the half court? Now you're really cooking because there just aren't going to be a ton of guys that I think can match up with him. He's a tweener in the sense of like how you guard him defensively. Like I think there's just going to be a lot of Big Ten teams that you don't want to put like a plotting anything near a plotting big man on him or a plotting 4 or 5. But you still want to have some size on him to be able to contest and kind of level him off and make his finishes around the rim a little bit more difficult. Um, so I think it's just going to be a challenge for a lot of these teams. But Ace can't help them out with, hey, I got a smaller guy on me. Let me take an 18-foot fadeaway.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, you've seen it, right? Like it's just he can't help himself. But I think if he is going to be a top 2 pick, which I think he can be, it's going to come from showing that you can simplify your game, right? That is like the next step I think for Ace Bailey, and it's tough in this like truncated year that you have where it's like get to campus on in June and then pretty much leave campus in April. Like how much can you evolve as a player in those 9-ish months? He's got a really good opportunity in front of him to hear his name be called second because I think we got a guy that's got the number 1 spot locked up.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It'll be interesting. You mentioned programs like Rutgers that have gotten 2 elite guys. Like the ones that come to mind to me are Cal the year they had Ivan Rabb and Jalen Brown, if you remember that. But beyond that, it's we've seen like Ben Simmons go to LSU. We've seen Washington get DeJounte Murray and then get Markel Fultz in different years. We've seen Cade
GG
Cunningham.
Jackson.
Yeah, Gigi Jackson and Cade Cunningham, Oklahoma State, Trey Young, Anthony Edwards, Michael Beasley. Like there's been varying levels of success for the programs that have brought these guys in. And I still think it's a risk asking freshmen to carry this much of the load, especially like we're still in the COVID era. A lot of these teams are going to have 24 and 25-year-olds guys out there. But I think that bringing in the veterans around him makes a lot of sense. All right, the X
Well,
factor for
you
this.
real quick, you mentioned all those teams that brought in those type of guys. How many of them won? Right? Like,
Not a lot of them.
nah, man. I mean, Beasley at Kansas State, like, it was a good team, but as
Yeah,
far as like March success,
none.
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 Yeah,
The Cal team made the tournament when they had Jalen Brown.
lost to
Trey,
Hawaii, right?
yep, Trey Young made the tournament, lost in the first round to Dan
Rhode
Hurley,
Island.
Rhode Island.
Yep.
Cade Cunningham, I think that year, didn't they make it to the Sweet 16? They lost to Oregon State when they had a chance to make it to the Elite Eight. I think that's how that played out. It was something. No, maybe they lost to Oregon
I
State in
think,
the second round. I think they lost to Oregon State in the second round.
yeah, because Oregon State beat Loyola, I think, in
Yep.
the Sweet 16
Yeah, that's what it was. And then
that year.
Oregon State made it to the Elite Eight. Yeah. So they've won, but they haven't won at the highest levels. But I'll be honest, man. Look, if Rutgers gets to the tournament, wins a game, like that's probably a pretty good year for Rutgers
Yeah,
overall. Like all due
totally.
respect to the Rutgers fans out there. I'm a New Jersey resident now. I don't need you guys knocking down my door, but like it's still Rutgers basketball, and getting to the tournament and winning a game is a great season for Rutgers basketball. X factor for this group, to me, it's the 5 spot. Like, what are you going to get from Agbole? What are you going to get from Martini? What are you going to get from anyone else that kind of plays that role? How is Pikiell going to use that role? What's going to end up being his decision there? I just, whatever he decides to do, that to me, that is what will determine how far this team goes and where they kind of end. I think that's what the swing position, I guess, is the way to phrase it. If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM Sportsbook. We are going to be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 throughout the year. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use bonus code FIELD, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. The best part, all you need to do is deposit and bet $10 of your own hard-earned money to be eligible. Here's how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using that bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure that you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. BetMGM is going to have some fun offers available throughout the NBA playoffs. Bet insurance tokens, odds boost, and what I love, a nice parlay boost or two from time to time, as well as a ridiculous array of player prop bets for any sport that you could possibly imagine betting on. BetMGM is and always will be the king of the prop bet. So go download the BetMGM app, use the bonus code FIELD, and sign up today. And while I've got you, a quick request. The best way to support the Field of 68 content that you get for free is to engage with us. Rate and review the podcast. Like and share the YouTube videos. Tell your friends about us. It all helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, and we touch on that 5 spot a little bit. I agree that that's an X factor. The other two guys that I'm looking at are Acuff and Durkak,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I think those two guys together are X factors because, again, at Merrimack, at Eastern Michigan, those are two guys that had over a 30% usage rate, right? So ending a possession in a field goal attempt, a free throw attempt, or a turnover. And for context, for people listening, Tyler Kolek was 24% last year. Like, that's a guy that had the ball in his hands a lot.
Nonstop.
And you got these guys coming in. So, like, how do they assimilate, right? Like, how do they fit into this? Because I still think that for Harper and Bailey to be able to hit their peak, those two guys got to be good. And those two guys got to be enough of a threat and efficient in their role to allow them, Harper and Bailey, to play and excel. So, and you could throw Jeremiah Williams in there too. Like,
Yeah.
that second tier of guys is going to determine, I think, where Harper and Bailey go. Those two are talented enough to have explosive games just individually, but it's going to lead to winning if those other guys can kind of really figure out their roles, because it's not going to be the same. I mean, Derek had the ball in his hands a ton last year. I think he had 8 games with over 7 turnovers, right? It's actually probably going to be good for him that he has the ball in his hands less and can just kind of be an athlete and, finish around the rim, create havoc defensively. And then we'll see with Acuff. Acuff, I mean, talk about a guy that had the ball in his hands. I mean, that dude had the ball in his hands every single possession for Eastern Michigan.
Yes.
So that's always, I mean, it's always a challenge for these teams that bring in these guys. It's not a video game. It's not like, hey, add this guy's 84 overall ranking to our team, and then all of a sudden we're this. Like there's human elements to this, and that's a part of what I think Rutgers is up against.
Yeah, one of the hard things for Tyson is going to be like you're probably a 15-minute game guy off the bench, where there's going to be games where you pop off for 20 points and you win you win the game for Rutgers because of what you did off the bench, and you're going to play 15 minutes the next game, and you got to be okay with that, right? You got to be able to accept that this is my job. I'm the microwave guy off the bench to get hot and try to make something happen.
No, you nailed it. I think his job has to be very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, man, you're coming off the bench, and you just pretty much got to see red. Like you got to be a threat, man. You got to come off ball screens looking to score. That way, you at least get the attention of the defense. Like, and I think if you're Tyson Acuff, you're like, I can do that. I can do that. It's just the volume is probably what he's gonna potentially have an issue with. But that's why you try to get good guys that understand their role.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. I'm curious your take overall just on the Big Ten, because I think that Purdue, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan State, Maryland, Ohio State, Rutgers, Oregon, UCLA. I think if you, I don't think I'm missing it. I might have missed someone in there. I apologize if I did. But there's like 9 or 10 teams at the top of the Big Ten where you could tell me that you think they're going to win the league this year. And I'd be like, yeah, I could see that happening. I think that I would not be shocked if we had like an 8-way tie at 12-8 for first place in this conference. So things are all kind of said and done. And I think Rutgers is right in that mix in terms of teams. I'd probably have them towards the bottom of that group, the bottom tier, but I think I would not be flabbergasted if they went 13-7 and won a share of the Big Ten regular season title.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd separate the Big Ten into tiers. I mean, I think that first tier, I think it's Purdue, it's Indiana, it's Illinois, it's Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the four that I think are up there. And then to me, like you look at like 5 through 13, I wouldn't be shocked if it's separated by 2 games this year. I mean, I think the middle of this league is going to completely cannibalize itself because and that's why I think
because it happens every year, Mike. Is that why?
It happens every year. And it's the margin for error for an Ohio State, for a Rutgers, for like the difference between you being 5th and you being 13th, you got to take care of the games you need to take care of, right? Like that is, and that's
honestly,
why
we're talking about 2 late game possessions, right? Like a game that is a 3-point game with 2 minutes left. Can you find a way to win that game? And you do that 3 times, and all of a sudden you go from 9-11 in the league to 12-8 in the league, and you go from being on the wrong side of the bubble to a 7 seed. Like that is what the difference. Those are the margins that we're talking about in the league this year.
And can you do that with youth? Right? Like like those margins are already so small. And when you have I don't want to say an inexperienced team, because Rutgers really isn't an inexperienced team, just at the really important spots they're inexperienced. So how do they navigate that? That's the way I look at the Big Ten, because you look at like Wisconsin, Iowa, like all these teams, what's USC going to be like? Some of these UCLA, you talked about them. I think all of them are like bunched into this massive second tier for me. And again, like I think you're gonna have to win the game of inches and win like late game. That's why I'm so fascinated with the Big Ten this year. And when you tune in and it's 65 with a minute and a half left, like that game, although it may be January 8th, is gonna really be huge when you look at March and you're looking at these standings. Like, man, these 8 teams are separated by a game and a half. I mean, it's just and can Rutgers overcome the inexperience at those positions? That's why I think Jeremiah Williams is so important, because I do think there's going to be an instance this year, whether it's Dylan Harper fouls out, foul trouble, like having a guy that I think can, it's like having a good backup quarterback, right? It's like there's importance to that where like you can come in, knows the offense, trust him, takes care of the ball, can facilitate. Like there's there's a lot of value there. And I think that's going to help them as they, as they navigate through the season.
All right, off-season grades. I went with a B. I think they brought a lot of really good pieces in, but they also lost the guy that was arguably their best player and one of like the top 5 transfers in the sport, in Big Cliff. So, I like what Pikiell did. I don't love what Pikiell did, and I think they kind of got beat a little bit in the NIL market, so to speak, with Big Cliff heading out. So, what's your off-season grade for the
I gave
Rutgers
him
Scarlet Knights?
I gave him a B plus. I do think they got a little bit more dynamic. I think they got a little bit more skilled. Um, Again, the only thing holding me back from giving Rutgers an A minus or an A, because if we're talking in totality, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
adding Bailey and Harper, I mean, it's an easy A if it's just like full picture. But if we're talking just pure off season, it's a B plus because I still have question marks at the 5, like we talked about. If you add Cliff or you retain Cliff to this team, that's a totally different conversation. So do they go Agbole? Do they go Martini with more of like a stretch 5 look? Do they go with Bailey as a stretch 5? Like all those things I think are on the table. And then I don't know. I look at who they put around Harper and Bailey. You needed shooting and you got some shooting, which I think is great. You needed a little bit more dynamic, some more dynamic scorers. I think you get that in Durkak and Acuff. Like you check those boxes. And again, like we're talking about it through the lens of, hey, can they get to an NCAA tournament? Can they be in the top half of the Big Ten? Because the reality is like, I'm not even thinking top half of the Big Ten. Can you be an above 500 team in league play? Because above 500 got you 5th place last year.
Mm-hmm.
So all that I think is on the table for Rutgers, and I'm really curious to see how they string all this together.
Yeah. I think they're going to have a shot to be at the very least an entertaining watch this year. And a lot of NBA scouts are going to be making their way to the rack this season and hopefully enjoying what that crowd can do to a building when they get fired up. Listen, Mike, it's been a pleasure. If you want to know why we brought Mike LaTulip on board, me and him just spent 31 minutes talking about Rutgers basketball on the day that the NFL season starts. So that tells you everything you need to know. Mike, always a pleasure, man. Good to see you.
Appreciate it, Rob.